As kids growing up in the 80s, we remember a lot of amazing stuff. Sugar-loaded cereals, bubblegum cigarettes, awesome toy commercials, and of course, Saturday morning cartoons. And speaking of cartoons, you can probably add one more familiar trope to the list: the token female character, the lone woman dropped into a sea of dudes, and who more often than not was the object of our very innocent boyhood fantasies. Every toy franchise worth its weight had one, including G.I. Joe, where that box was checked by Scarlett, and then CoverGirl, Lady Jaye, then Jinx, Dana, Doc, Marissa, Mayday. Hey, wait a minute. That's actually quite a lot of tokens. We all know how this story usually goes. When it came to the toys made for boys, there wasn't much room for the girls. Okay, maybe just one. Tale as old as time, that's just how boy toys rolled in the 80s. But as the years went on and as we collectively moved up a few levels of social awareness and common sense, it became pretty clear that, yeah, there was room for more than that. And for an unusually long-running toy brand like G.I. Joe, it was kind of inevitable that things would change as the world around it did. So after the initial bare minimum of Scarlett, CoverGirl, Lady Jaye, and Jinx, it's really no surprise that over its over 40-plus year history, the real American heroes slowly welcomed more women into the mix. Sometimes as full-fledged team members, sometimes as allies, sometimes as friends, or more than friends. And in at least one very specific case, someone's actual kid. Okay, my point is there's a lot more to the women of G.I. Joe than just what I would call the Big Four. And those are the characters I want to talk about today. The other women of G.I. Joe, beyond the Big Four. So, let's get the balls rolling. Yeah, okay, maybe not the best choice of words for this story, but you know what I mean. Buckle up for an estrogen overdose. First up, let's start at the very beginning, and I mean way before the 80s Real American Hero era, all the way back to the 1960s. When G.I. Joe wasn't an army, he was just a man, and that man obviously had a woman. Because just like Barbie had Ken, G.I. Joe had G.I. Jane. Just kidding. G.I. Jane. Essentially the female counterpart to the original 12-inch Joe. And fitting the time, she wasn't a soldier, she was a nurse. Anyway, fast forward a couple of decades to issue number 86 of the original Marvel G.I. Joe comics, which Larry Hama wrote celebrating the 25th anniversary of the line. The Joes are fighting off an Iron Grenadier invasion of the Chrysler building and get help from the building's chief of security, some dude named Joe, who just happens to be guarding a top-secret rapid pulse electron beam project. And that project headed by a manager named Jane. Yeah, you can probably see where this is going, right? Sure enough, Hama uses that setup to quietly bring G.I. Joe and G.I. Jane into modern continuity as General Joseph Colton and Dr. Jane Martell. After the battle is won, they reveal themselves as the original Joe and Jane, prompting the Joe Swamp Fighter Muskrat to drop one of the most perfectly meta lines in the series. Golly, I always thought you were bigger. Anyway, as for the toys, G.I. Jane finally got her smaller scale plastic debut in 2006, when she showed up in a Viper lockdown set alongside Joe Colton, the Interrogator, and a squad of Vipers. She'd later get a more modern release in 2017 through the G.I. Joe Collectors Club subscription service, complete with a much more detailed profile, where she's described as a military operative whose cover identity was that of a combat nurse, using her medical skills and scientific expertise in strategic defense tech around the world. Officially retired from the active roster, but, of course, quietly reassigned to deep cover operations here and there, hell, everywhere. Now, after starting off with a pretty historical character, let's dial it back a bit and run through a few friends and allies of the team. Starting with this one. Her name was Lola, and no, she wasn't a showgirl with yellow flowers in her hair and her dress cut down to there. This Lola shows up in G.I. Joe A Real American Hero issue number 56 as a student at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where the OG-13 Joe Grunt enrolls to earn his engineering degree after leaving active duty. Eventually, Grunt and Lola get married and ride off into the sunset. But that's not actually why I'm bringing her up. See, before college, Lola, sorry, couldn't help it, served 4 years in the US Army, which makes her a lot more than just the wife. In fact, she ends up joining Grunt and the Joes on an actual mission where she proves more than capable, providing cover and holding her own alongside the team. It even earns her top billing on the issue's cover. Not bad. Which brings us to Candy Apple, also known as Bongo the Balloon Bear, who first shows up helping the Joes in Marvel issue number 33. She also ends up winning the heart of the Joe Ripcord. Unfortunately, things get messy when it's revealed that Candy is the daughter of a high-ranking Crimson Guardsman, making her connections to the Joes and to Ripcord complicated, at best. And this is where the story takes a hard, dark turn. Candy's life ends not in battle, but by pure bad luck, in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a car accident. And just to make absolutely sure she doesn't survive it, Cobra operative Scrap Iron finishes the job by blowing the wreckage to pieces. It's one of those moments that really drives home how brutal the Marvel run could actually get, and how even cutesy balloon bears weren't safe. But with that said, let's jump into something a little lighter, the cartoons. More specifically, the very first G.I. Joe miniseries in 1983, The Mass Device, where we're introduced to a young lady simply known as Selena, a minor but memorable character, neither a Joe nor a Cobra agent, but a captive within Cobra's mountain stronghold. Witnessing Duke's enslavement, Selena risks her life to help him, but before fleeing, Duke gives her his G.I. Joe ring, presented as a promise to return, but secretly containing a homing beacon that leads the Joes straight to Cobra's hidden base. In the miniseries climax, the Joes successfully storm the stronghold, rescue Selena and her peeps, and she rewards Duke with a kiss, right in front of Scarlett. Man of action, indeed. Anyway, despite Selena braving the wrath of Scarlett, as far as cartoon allies go, I would actually award the most popular title to Miss Honda Lou West, president and manager of Wild West Holland, who makes her debut in the next miniseries, 1984's The Revenge of Cobra. While running a food-hauling convoy, Honda's trucks are hijacked by Cobra and she's taken prisoner. There she meets and teams up with Roadblock, along with the fellow prisoners Duke and Snake Eyes. And after battling a couple of laser-light two-dimensional serpents for Cobra Commander's entertainment, the group manages to turn the tables by defeating Cobra from the inside, with the help of some extremely creepy mutant vines. Anyway, despite forming a close bond with Roadblock, her relationship with him remained completely platonic, which is not the case for Quick Kick and his girlfriend, Amber. In the episode Lasers in the Night, Amber is introduced as a martial arts trained college student who catches Quick Kick's attention during a campus demonstration. From there, she becomes determined to prove she's Joe material, which, in classic cartoon logic, leads her to infiltrate a Cobra base on Snake Island. She's captured, but manages to turn things around using her skills to help Lady Jaye and Gung Ho derail Cobra's plans. By the end, Amber is actually offered an official invitation to join G.I. Joe, which she politely declines because it turns out that battling terrorists isn't quite as fun as college. Remember, kiddies, be like Amber. Stay in school. And finally, Marissa Fairborn, who technically isn't a Joe. She's not even really an ally. What she is the future daughter of Flint and Lady Jaye, at least in most versions of her story. Marissa actually debuted in Season 3 of the Transformers cartoon in 1986, where she's a captain in Earth Defense Command, the EDC, a human military organization working alongside the Autobots. And aside from that, in Japan, she also has the very special responsibility of powering up Optimus Prime with her kisses. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. Because if we're being honest, we all know who she'd probably rather be kissing anyway, a certain ex-Decepticon Blue Jet. Okay, stopping. Point is, Marissa Fairborn isn't a Joe in the traditional sense, but I mean, it wouldn't be much of a stretch to deduce that in this joint cartoon universe, G.I. Joe eventually turns into Earth Defense Command, right? So, yeah, she counts in my book. Anyway, let's jump into something that's pretty common nowadays. Gender swaps. For better or worse, they're a thing. And G.I. Joe took its own crack at it with Jill S. Morelli, the sister of Jack S. Morelli, better known to all of us as Dial Tone. As in, yes, they're both Dial Tone. Jill Morelli first showed up in the 2009 G.I. Joe Resolute microseries, where she serves as a communications and tech expert for the team. And eventually, she got her very own action figure as part of a Toys R Us exclusive Desert Disguise 5-pack. Unfortunately, Jill was basically treated like an army builder. Standard desert camo, no personality, no flair. And sadly, no snazzy green vest or beret like her brother. But that's not a reason to be down, cause next we find out what's up with Doc. Well, not that Doc, because that Doc, Carl Greer, is unfortunately dead, killed by an overzealous Saw Viper during an ill-fated mission in Trucial Abysmia. Fortunately, Doc's legacy doesn't end there. It gets picked up by his niece, Carla Greer, better known as Doc 2. While she was originally introduced as a straight-up gender swap of the original Doc in the Devil's Due G.I. Joe Reloaded series, Carla Greer eventually became her own official character when she was folded into the main Real American Hero canon. That happened with her inclusion in the 2007 convention-exclusive set, Tanks for the Memories, and later with a more modern release through the G.I. Joe Collectors Club subscription service in 2016. So yeah, the original Doc may be gone, but his niece steps in to carry on the family tradition, sharing his medical brilliance, his strict pacifist code, and his dedication to safeguarding the right to human life. And speaking of rights, are you familiar with the right of might? That slogan was very proudly plastered across the chest of the Joe known as Salvo, the anti-armor trooper first introduced in 1990. Fast forward a few decades later, and in the pages of IDW's G.I. Joe, Salvo gets, well, a straight-up gender swap. This time, Salvo is reimagined as a very large Samoan woman. Yeah. According to series writer Aubrey Sitterson, the decision was partly about internationalism, giving the team a little more Polynesian flavor, and partly because the original look, bald, massively muscled white guy with giant guns and a shirt that literally says "The Right of Might," was starting to read as, let's say, a little too alt-right for modern audiences. Okay, whatever. Moving on. Anyway, since we've already started talking about international flavors, let's lean into that and move on to our next group. Back in the 80s, Hasbro didn't really have the global infrastructure it has today. So instead of shipping American toys all over the world, they licensed G.I. Joe out to local companies. Estrella in Brazil, Plastirama in Argentina, Palitoy in the UK, Fun School in India, and a few others. The result was some genuinely fascinating regional variations, where the same basic plastic molds were reused to create entirely new characters. And that's how we ended up with Joes like Glenda, Quarrel, Sparta, Canary Ann, and Natalie Poole. So Jane Mulligan, better known as Glenda, is an Argentine G.I. Joe character created by Plastirama. At her core, Glenda is essentially a repaint of the original Scarlett figure, now with blonde hair and a silver and sky blue deco. But in her own continuity, she's established as a heroic helicopter pilot and air intelligence officer. Unfortunately, when Glenda eventually crosses over into the US G.I. Joe comics, her story takes a much darker turn. She's killed in an ambush by the mysterious Red Shadows. A pretty brutal end for a character who started life as an international exclusive. Still, at the very least, she lives on in plastic. While the 25th anniversary pilot Scarlett was an obvious nod to her, Glenda finally made her official US action figure debut decades later as an add-on tier for the 2024 HasLab Dragonfly project, cementing her place as G.I. Joe's premier international co-pilot. Not to be left out of the whole Scarlett repaint fun, the UK company Palitoy gave us their own take in the form of Hida Pulver, better known as Quarrel. Decked out in dark green and black, Quarrel was positioned as an undercover operations specialist. And while her codename suggests she enjoys a good fight, which I'm guessing she probably does, she's best known as a full-on daredevil on a motorcycle. She was also a core member of Z-Force, the backbone unit of the British Action Force toy line. These days, though, Quarrel has officially crossed over into the US G.I. Joe canon as part of the Night Force sub-team, thanks to a classified series 2-pack released in 2025 alongside Lieutenant Falcon. And if the promo shots are any indication, she now spends most of her time quarreling with zombies. So I guess that still technically makes her part of a Z-Force, just a very different kind of Z. Meanwhile, over in Brazil, the Australia Toy Company went in a completely different repaint direction. Instead of Scarlett, they used CoverGirl as the base for their secret agent character, Brigid Cortez, codenamed Sparta, in Australia's version of the line, Commandos de Macau. Sparta was presented as an elite undercover operative whose low-key silent nature is quite the departure from CoverGirl's missile tank driving background. And it feels pretty appropriate that Sparta eventually made the jump into US canon through the 2011 International G.I. Joe Convention exclusive Mission Brazil 2 box set from the official G.I. Joe Collectors Club. And just so we've got all the major international players covered, we also have Fun School in India, who gave us Canary Anne. And honestly, her name kind of says it all. She's a very not at all mellow yellow repaint of Lady Jaye, and if you ask me, she looks like she'd be more comfortable hanging out with 4 mutant turtles than fighting Cobra. Anyway, jokes aside, Canary Anne was actually a promotional figure tied to the Complan nutritional drink and a member of the so-called Complan Commandos, and as of right now, has never officially debuted in the US, but come on, with a repaint this fun, there was absolutely no way I wasn't going to at least mention her. And finally, we have Natalie Poole, who actually began life as a 12-inch doll during Hasbro's mid-90s attempt to revive Action Man. This was the 1995 Extreme Adventure relaunch, which pushed the character away from straight military realism and into full-on high-tech espionage. And if you ask me, Miss Poole definitely looked dressed for the occasion. Anyway, for the longest time, Natalie Poole was considered strictly an Action Man character. But that changed thanks to the 2010 G.I. Joe convention, where she was officially folded into Joe lore by releasing her as a 3.75-inch figure for the first time, reimagined as a member of Q-Force, the aquatic division of Action Force, complete with a black silent attack kayak, a repaint of the classic 1989 Stalker accessory. And here's an additional fun collector's tidbit. That figure's head sculpt became kind of famous on its own because it was originally intended for an entirely different toy line, Mortal Kombat. Yes, that's Sonya Blade's head, which means Natalie Poole technically has 1 foot in G.I. Joe, 1 foot in Action Man, and a toe in a high-stakes interdimensional martial arts competition where the greatest warriors from different realms fight to the death to prevent an aggressive empire from legally conquering and merging with their home world. Alright, sorry, got a little off track there. Moving on to more modern territory, we've got Valor vs. Venom, one of Hasbro's less successful attempts to revive G.I. Joe in the early 2000s. And while that era didn't exactly set the world on fire, it does get credit for giving us Bomb Strike, along with a whole lot of surprisingly heavy family drama. Bomb Strike was introduced in 2005 as part of a 2-pack with Crocmaster. Her real name is Alyssa Renee Stahl, and she's an elite forward air controller, very much a product of the new age of remote-controlled warfare. She's also a former star athlete, the youngest of 3 Stahl siblings and completely stuck in the middle of a literal war at home. Her brother, Barrel Roll, fighting for the Joes, and her other brother, Blackout, defecting to Cobra. Her story is one of the most personal in modern Joe history, centered on her abduction by her traitorous brother and her eventual rescue. Character-wise, Bomb Strike is defined by precision and very play-to-win mindset, something she picked up from competitive football. That focus, combined with her backstory, helped turn her into a bit of a cult favorite, eventually earning her a modernized update in 2015 through, once again, the G.I. Joe Collectors Club. And beyond the character herself, Bomb Strike has some fun behind-the-scenes toy trivia too. First, if her original figure looks a little too familiar, that's because the body was reused a year later with a new head to make G.I. Jane. Second, her codename was originally supposed to be Bombshell, but that got changed at the last minute due to a trademark issue raised by a certain mind-controlling Insecticon. Okay, kidding. And finally, Bomb Strike is named after a real person, the daughter of Dwight Stahl, a lead designer on Hasbro's G.I. Joe line during that era, and someone who's since become very visible online for his work on Marvel Legends. If you know, you know. Anyway, while Valor vs. Venom didn't exactly reignite the G.I. Joe world in the early 2000s, a certain indie comics publisher called Devil's Due actually did a solid job at giving the brand a mini revival, at least on the page. Story-wise, they literally picked up right where the original Marvel series left off, offering their take on what happened a few years after that last issue. And along with bringing back familiar faces, they did what any revival does. They injected in some new blood, including in one case a new recruit who was also a familiar face. Enter Dana Janak, or Dana, original member of the October Guard, the USSR's answer to G.I. Joe, and longtime frenemies of the team in both the comics and the cartoons. Given that most of the original Guard were, spoiler, let's just say unfortunately wiped out in the Marvel run, it actually makes a lot of sense that Dana, one of the few survivors, would eventually find a new home with the Joes. Under Devil's Due, she takes on a new codename, Verona, which is Russian for crow, and that's a pretty fitting choice. Crows are often associated with longevity, intelligence, and careful observation, all qualities that line up nicely with Dana's status as a survivor and her specialty as a sniper. Less loud battlefield presence, more watch from a distance precision, a bird of opportunity, basically, and a smart evolution for the character. And just to put a plastic button on it, while we've gotten a few Dana action figures over the years, we didn't actually get Verona in figure form until much later. Her first and so far only Verona release came in 2018, once again as part of the G.I. Joe Collectors Club subscription service. Long wait, but at least she finally made it onto the shelf. And speaking of the shelf, how would you like to become friends of my toy shelf? As a member of my channel, you will enjoy episode shoutouts, early access, and exclusive content, all for a measly $1. All you gotta do is click on the join button on my channel homepage and you're golden. That being said, any way you choose to help me out, like likes, comments, shares, and subs, will be greatly appreciated, so thank you. Anyway, aside from bringing a familiar face into the Joe ranks in Verona, Devil's Due also worked some magic behind the scenes by bringing familiar writer Larry Hama himself back into the fold. And with him came a new twist on the very lore he started back in Marvel issue number 1. In the 2006 limited series G.I. Joe Declassified, Hama finally paid off one of the oldest blink and you miss it mysteries in G.I. Joe history by introducing Sergeant Jodi Craig, codenamed Shooter. So, okay, quick rewind. In the very first issue of Marvel's G.I. Joe, there's a panel showing headshots of the original team on a computer screen. 13 names we all know, and a 14th slot in the bottom corner simply labeled Shooter, with the face conveniently obscured. At the time, it was just a little Easter egg, a nod to the then Marvel editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter, and nothing more. Or so we thought. Fast forward 24 years later, and Hama turns that throwaway joke into canon. Shooter was real. Sergeant Craig was the team's secret 14th member, a sniper who operated completely off the books. In a clever retcon, Declassified reveals that she'd been present during several of the Joe's earliest missions, providing unseen overwatch like a guardian angel, including the events of issue number 1, which are now retold from her perspective. And it ends tragically. During the evacuation of Cobra's castle, Shooter realizes Cobra troops are using civilians as ammo bearers. She breaks cover to save them, succeeds, and is gunned down in the process. The Joes escape, unaware that they survived only because of her sacrifice. And that's the gut punch, because even if a service was held, the team never truly knew what Shooter gave up, or how many of them owed their lives to her. That being said, at least she eventually got some love in plastic form, with her first ever figure released in 2016 as part of the 50th anniversary line, followed by a classified series release in 2023, now designated as a member of Night Force, which is quite apt, given that in the current Skybound G.I. Joe series, Shooter, who is apparently alive and well, is rescued from a Darklonian prison by a Night Force team comprised of Beachhead, Flint, and Lady Jaye, officially restoring her as an active member of the new universe's roster. But back to the Devil's Due universe, where we also got a couple of new, admittedly short-lived characters, in the form of new students for both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and both unfortunately sharing tragic fates. Apparently, being trained by G.I. Joe's two deadliest ninjas isn't guaranteed life insurance. Snake Eyes student Ophelia, who, yes, looks suspiciously like Scarlett, is killed on her very first mission with Snake Eyes during a failed attempt to take down Firefly. Story-wise, she turns out to just be a literal red herring meant to misdirect readers from Snake Eyes' actual future apprentice, Sean Collins, who eventually becomes Kamakura. Meanwhile, Storm Shadow's student and apparent lover, Junko Akita, is kidnapped and tortured by the Red Ninja clan, brainwashed into believing Storm Shadow himself was responsible. When he tries to rescue her, they're reunited as enemies. Junko eventually breaks free of the conditioning but still meets a tragic end, leaping from a cliff to her presumed death. Her body never recovered, of course. But back to the Joes, with Mayday, a name that somehow manages to belong to not one, not two, but three completely different characters, depending on which era we're talking about. The first Mayday showed up in the 90s era G.I. Joe Extreme as the team's female character. She's a technical specialist and is basically the Scarlett of that lineup, right down to the bright red hair. Just, more extreme. Years later, in what feels very much like a callback to that version, Devil's Due introduced their own Mayday, an urban warfare specialist named Paige Adams. This is actually the version I really took a liking to, enough so that I went ahead and made my own custom figure of her. But unfortunately, there isn't much else to her than that. The third Mayday comes along much later in IDW's comics during the Hasbro-mandated shared universe era, where G.I. Joe, Transformers, and pretty much every other boy toy property they own got all mashed up together. This Mayday, Ayana Jones, is a veteran Joe who eventually becomes second in command of the EDC, before looping back into G.I. Joe proper. She's a no-nonsense warrant officer with a dry, wry sense of humor, who actually started out as a background character in Transformers Robots in Disguise. But when writer John Barber took a liking to her, she was promoted into a supporting role and eventually became the lead of Revolutionaries. And her deeper history with G.I. Joe was later established through a bit of retroactive continuity during the Revolution crossover, which, was probably done to make her more interesting. And the final new Joe recruit from Devil's Due, and honestly, probably my favorite, is computer specialist Michelle LaChance, codenamed Firewall. She begins as a rebellious teenage hacker from Virginia Beach whose illegal exploits land her in government custody and ultimately on assignment with G.I. Joe, where she's paired with fellow techie Sebastian Stone, better known as Damon, under Mainframe's supervision. Firewall is the rougher half of the duo, talented, impatient, and still figuring out who she's supposed to be. And that's a big part why I took such a liking to her. If you ask me, Firewall brings a genuinely new perspective to a classic franchise, and in her case, that perspective turns brutal pretty fast. During one of her first field missions, she witnesses Serpentor snap Damon's neck during a coil ambush right in front of her, a moment that forces her to grow up fast and turns raw talent into hard focus. From there, Firewall becomes a regular presence throughout Devil Jew's run and later plays a key role in the Joe Autobot alliance, helping open warp gates to Cybertron for the Joes and racking up a surprisingly impressive list of accomplishments, including surviving an encounter with the Serpent OR bio-android and narrowly escaping a Pretender monster attack. And speaking of monsters, her story hits its peak in Tibet, where she's captured by a Yeti. Yes, a Yeti. And nearly sacrificed by Cobra Law to honor Unicron, only to be saved by Optimus Prime, whom she later manages to convince to unwind and watch some truly bad TV. I'd say that's pretty good for a once rebellious hacker turned behind-the-scenes powerhouse, who wasn't defined by battlefield glory but by resilience, growth, and the hard lessons she learns along the way. Unfortunately, when the G.I. Joe license moved to IDW, that franchise hit a hard reset, and the Devil's Due version of Firewall didn't survive it. She was replaced by a new take that worked on paper but never really clicked for me. IDW's Firewall is older, colder, and more grounded, a Naval Academy grad and elite artillery officer. She survives a Black Hawk shootdown that kills almost everyone else, but instead of being rewarded, she's sidelined behind a desk for being too valuable to lose. When G.I. Joe finally recruits her, it's not because she fits the myth, but because she's the adult in the room, the organizer, the blunt voice, the one reminding everyone that missions have consequences. In her own words, she's basically the Joe's den mother. And that realism works, to a point. But for me, she always felt a little bland, maybe because I was still mourning the messier, more compelling Devil's Due version. And in a final bit of irony, despite being stationed behind the desk, even this Firewall doesn't make it out alive, brutally killed by Steeler, the original Joe, who in this universe is revealed as a Cobra mole. Anyway, since we're already in IDW, let's stay there. So IDW basically ran two G.I. Joe continuities, their own and the official, sorry Devil's Due, continuation of the Marvel series by OG writer Larry Hama. In IDW's own continuity, one of their best books, simply titled Cobra, we get two new characters who apparently use the same codename, at different points of time of course. Chameleon. So, back in the year 2000, Hasbro actually lost the trademark for the Baroness name. And so to fix that, her figure was briefly released as a new character named Chameleon. And IDW folds that weird bit of toy history into the comics by introducing Erica Leten, a Cobra operative who looks suspiciously like the Baroness because she's her half-sister. Unlike the Baroness though, Erica isn't determined to rule the world, but she's stuck working for Extensive Enterprises, Cobra's corporate front under the Crimson Twins, Tomax and Xamot. Eventually, when she sees the apparent writing on the wall, in other words, she's determined to be expendable, Erica defects to the Joes. Taking the codename Chameleon, she becomes a key intelligence asset. Never fully trusted, but absolutely invaluable thanks to her insider knowledge of Cobra's finances and social networks. The second character introduced as Chameleon is another lookalike, but this time to the Joe Jinx, who essentially replaces this universe's version of Jinx, who was unfortunately killed. Sorry, no spoilers here. Trust me, just read the series. You won't regret it. This new Chameleon is introduced with the specific mission of finding and recovering the undercover agent Chuckles, who has disappeared after going deep undercover into Cobra. Eventually, she does find Chuckles, but lets him go off on his mission of revenge as she instead takes with her a more valuable asset back to the Joes. You guessed it, the Cobra defector Erica Leten. Anyway, years later, Chameleon, now going by the name Ronin, is is on the run from Storm Shadow. Eventually, she confronts him, and as you can guess, despite her own formidable ninja skills, as Sunstreaker says, you can't beat the best. Yeah, it doesn't end well for her. She should have just kept Ronin. And finally, at least for their own universe, there's hashtag IDW's attempt at breathing some new life into their continuity and I guess look hip with the times. Late in the run, IDW rolled out the concept of two separate Joe units operating independently from each other, a public-facing team and a covert Black Ops unit. And apparently, if you're running a public team, what you really need is a blogger. So in comes hashtag, an embedded journalist brought in to document Joe missions for public consumption. This goes over just about as well as you'd expect, especially since she's never seen combat and openly dislikes guns. Not exactly your classic battle-ready real American hero. To be fair, once she's actually in the field, she turns out to be a competent operative and a genuinely skilled communications specialist. I mean, that's my guess. I was pretty much out of IDW's G.I. Joe by this point. Which honestly is still better than Hama's continuation, one I never really connected with. Can you tell I'm still a little bitter over their dick move on Devil's Due? Anyway, that said, to be fair, Larry Hama did introduce a handful of new female characters during his IDW continuation of A Real American Hero. So this part's gonna be a bit of a speed round because, yeah, this era just wasn't my thing. First up are Bottom Line, Sherlock, and Black Hat, three of the newest recruits added late in the IDW run around 2021. After years of dealing with not just Cobra but the endless bureaucracy of the Pentagon, Larry Hama finally decided that the Joes needed a specialist for that battle too. Because while G.I. Joe is an elite strike force, someone still has to navigate red tape and keep an eye on the bottom line. So enter, well, Bottom Line. Real name Jenny Munn, the team's finance officer and accounting specialist. While most Joes wage war with heavy weapons or stealth, Bottom Line fights a different kind of conflict. Budgets, logistics, and funding. Making sure the team stays operational and the books stay balanced. Hey, even an elite strike force needs all its bases covered. And that's the bottom line, because I say so. Sorry, couldn't help it. Next up, Regina Allen, codenamed Sherlock, comes from a long line of law enforcement and followed that path enlisting as an MP before becoming a Criminal Investigation Division special agent. During her final deployment in the Middle East, she's badly wounded and loses her left arm, later replaced with an advanced powered prosthetic. On the Joe team, she serves as their investigative specialist, the one you call when there's a mole to uncover or a mystery that needs actual deductive work, not just firepower. Man, where was she when old Firewall was killed? Speaking of which, where Firewall and Mainframe were characters that focused on defense and system support, Olivia S. Bypage, better known as Black Hat, was the Joe's offensive cyber warfare specialist. Black Hat represents the other side of the digital battlefield, breaking into secure networks, data theft, and outright digital sabotage. She's there to kick doors in, just, electronically. And speaking of kicking, because this is Larry Hama's universe we're talking about, yeah, of course there are more ninjas. Starting with Margarita Shiro, better known as Pale Peony. This character actually debuted under Hama during the Devil's Due era and proved popular enough that she made the jump with him to IDW when he continued his Marvel storyline. While she never officially joined the Joe team, she was a frequent ally, often partnered up with Jinx. Unfortunately, Peony meets a pretty definitive end when she's vaporized, trying to take down a cyborg enemy that self-destructs, leaving behind nothing but a smoldering pile of pink clothes. Next up, the answer to the question of who runs the Arashikage clan now that all the uncles, hard, soft, and blind, are dead. Why, the auntie, of course. Obaki Obasan, literally Demon Granny. No, wait. Okay, no horns or a glowing orb. Maybe a little smile? Less demon, more granny? There you go. Obake Obasan is the widow of the Hard Master, aunt to Storm Shadow, and a highly skilled and highly intimidating elder of the clan. Her most important duty, though, is as the mentor to Don Moreno. The female Snake Eyes. Wait, what? Okay. So, Don Moreno is essentially the biological successor to Snake Eyes, a former high school star athlete taken in by Cobra, and who's accidentally imprinted with the entire memory and skill set of the original Snake Eyes via the brainwave scanner. And with training from Obake Obasan, she learns to control these ghost memories and becomes a full-fledged Arashikage ninja, eventually serving on the Joe team as the new Snake Eyes because apparently you can never have too many Snake Eyes. Am I right? Just to recap, the original Snake Eyes dies taking out Serpentor, Kamakura briefly carries the mantle, and then we get Dawn Moreno. Look, I know she has her fans, and I'll fully admit I didn't read this run closely enough to be the final authority. But from the outside looking in, I don't know, a female Snake Eyes just felt a little too hokey for my taste. But that's just me. Anyway, let's wrap things up with a couple more characters who debuted outside of the comics or cartoons. First up is Freestyle, a modern-era Joe first introduced as a toy, and more specifically a 2013 Collectors Club exclusive. Freestyle is a first-generation immigrant from the Dominican Republic, a character meant to bridge the grit of New York City streets and the high-tech world of aerial combat. Pilot of the Night Boomer, essentially a blackened-out Sky Striker, she's a key asset to Night Force, known for her reckless, fearless flying style and the kind of high-risk maneuvers that give the team control of both the air and the ground. And in a nice bit of human flavor, when she's actually off duty, Freestyle's known for her cooking skill and her eclectic taste in music. And finally, to finish things off, we've got the one character who breaks the whole premise of this episode, because while she may have started out as one of the others, I would argue she ended up becoming something bigger. So big, in fact, that if you ask me, I now consider the Big Four not really accurate anymore, as Agent Helix now makes it the Big Five. Agent Helix began life in an unusual place, created for the 2009 G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra video game by Double Helix Games, which is where her codename comes from. But she quickly outgrew those origins in the comics and became something far more interesting. Helix is a covert specialist whose real name remains classified and operates less like a traditional soldier and more like a living tactical engine. Her defining trait is an almost unnerving ability known as total organic battlefield awareness. To Helix, combat isn't chaos, it's data. She instinctively tracks ammo count, fuel levels, angles of attack, and probability outcomes in real time, often solving problems before anyone else even realizes they exist. And thankfully, she can back it all up physically. Helix is an Olympic-level gymnast, an expert marksman who favors dual pistols, and a vicious close-quarters fighter. Efficient, overwhelming, no wasted motion. That being said, Helix's toy story is surprisingly lean, with just a single 1/18th scale Rise of Cobra figure released in 2009. And sure, there had already been a number of female Joe figures released before her, but to me, Helix felt different. She had real fresh G.I. Joe energy. She looked like a character who could genuinely make waves in the franchise moving forward. All that despite a rather questionable pre-digital face paint deco. Yeesh. Thankfully, the next version more than made up for it. In spades. The phenomenal 6-inch classified series Helix, released in 2023, finally delivered her now iconic look, upgraded with vastly improved detailing and thankfully modern face deco. And those retractable swords, a very welcome touch. And that was it. Pansit. But honestly, that might be all we really need, unless you're an O-ring diehard, in which case you're probably still holding out hope for a retro-styled Helix. Come on, Super 7, what are you waiting for? And speaking of Super 7, did any of you collect their Ultimates G.I. Joe line? I did, and if you want to know my thoughts on those slavishly tuned-styled action figures, you can check out my unscripted overview here. Or if you want my latest story, I've got that over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Who is your favorite Joe lady beyond the Big Four? Go ahead and tell me your story.